256.0106 from 1 right, cleared for takeoff.
1 right, clear to go, yeah, thank you,
Cleared 4461, 1 right, left and white.
Hey everyone, I'm Jason Rosewell. Mark Skyhawk Heavy Denton is over there, and that makes this FlightCast, the one and only infinite flight podcast. If you're just joining us for the first time, this is a show about the mobile flight simulator Infinite Flight, which you can find in the App Store or on Google Play. And hey, thanks for listening. Mark, what's going on?
Not much at all, just hanging out with my son this weekend.
Nice. Did you and Wake Turbulence meet any ladies at Longhorn the other night?
Hey, we had a couple looking, and it's a curse, man, and he'll tell you the same thing.
I'm
Daddy,
sure.
we don't have to look for them; they will come to us. So
You're in trouble, bro.
that's my 11-year-old, I know.
All right, well, let's introduce today's guest. He's a pilot for a national European airline and currently pilots the most recent addition to the Infinite Flight fleet of aircraft, the Dash 8. He's joining me today from the UK. Ard Jan, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me tonight.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess it's tonight for you. You're about 4 hours ahead of me and 5 hours ahead of Mark. Why don't we start out with the typical first question that I always love to ask my pilots who are guests on the show. What is your background with aviation, and what got you into flying?
Well, that's a very nice question. From when I was very young, aviation always attracted me very much. And as a kid, we regularly went to South Africa. And on those flights, I was regularly invited to the cockpit. So as a kid, that made quite a big impression on me, if you, as you might understand.
Yes, for sure.
And that's where it probably all started. And later, friends took me on their VFR flights in the Cessna and on the jump seat in the 737, which was awesome, of course. And not much later, I started my own integrated ATPL flight training. And here I am, flying the Bombardier Dash 8 Q400 and living the dream.
Living the dream. That's exactly what our friend Arnold said when he was on the show, just living the dream.
Yeah, it's true.
That's awesome.
Have you noticed how all the airline pilots that we have on here, that they started by being invited into the cockpit of the airliners?
Yes, good point. We had Melvin on last week, and he said the exact same thing. He was 3, and it's a shame. You just can't do that anymore because, there's too many psychos.
Yeah, I mean, and look at me. I'm a GA pilot. I'm a private pilot, but, I worked for Northwest Airlines for 15 years, but, my first flight was in a little Piper Cherokee. So, they got the big cockpits. I got the one that I had to put on to get in.
Yeah. All right. So, Arjan, we should back up a little bit. Where are you from? Because I'm not hearing a UK accent coming out of your mouth.
Originally, I'm from the Netherlands.
The Netherlands, and that is why you have the identical accent to our friend Arnold. That's great.
Yes, probably.
He's got a question for you later on when we get to the Facebook questions. Okay, so you started out from a young age, and then in your professional career, what aircraft have you flown, and what led up to you piloting the Dash 8?
Well, in flight training, I flew the Cessna 172. Later the Piper Arrow and Seminole, and the multi-crew coordination part was on the Beech 200 simulator, and the jet orientation course after that was on the 737-800 full motion simulator. And shortly after completion of my flight training, I applied to Flybe and got my first job being a first officer on the Dash 8, which I'm currently flying. Okay,
so you haven't been a commercial pilot for a long amount of time then, so far?
No, to be honest, almost a year now.
Wow, awesome. This is great.
Yeah.
We've had Dale McLaughlin on a few episodes back, who is currently working on his, he has just got his CPL, and he's doing some training with, help me out, Mark. EasyJet. And so he's on the A320 family of aircraft and jumping straight to the jets. So do you have any experience flying jets then, or you went straight to the turboprop?
I went straight to the turboprop.
Okay,
yeah.
And was that a conscious decision, or was that just a opportunity that you had, or with Flybe, or how did that come about?
It was actually a fantastic first opportunity which I took with both hands. So yeah.
Okay.
Art, got a lot of friends over here in the States that, have moved on to a lot of the major carriers and stuff like that. But I know that they started off flying turboprops. A lot of them flew the Saab 340, which is probably one of my favorite turboprops. But and then they've, of course, transitioned over to the MD-88s, the CRJs and stuff like that. How did the airlines in the UK actually look at the time, the hours logged as far as moving from a turboprop to a jet turbine?
I think it's easier to get another job in the UK if you have jet time, but they still accept Dash 8 hours, turboprop hours.
Oh, okay.
So does that make it just makes it depends on the airline then, I suppose, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Fantastic. So why don't we? What you already answered this in the first question, but my next one was just: you're flying the Dash 8? Is it the Q400? And the answer to that is yes. So have you trained on? You mentioned a few other aircraft that you used a term that I didn't understand actually at the start. You said something about what were the phases of training that you went through?
Yeah. After doing an integrated flight training, you have to do an MCC. I don't know if they have that in the UK and the US as well. It's a multi-crew coordination.
That's the one I didn't understand. So can you explain that?
Yeah, it's about working together and dealing with all kinds of situations under harsh circumstances.
That's moving from piloting an airplane by yourself to having somebody else to. Okay, got it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of like falling under, I believe, CRM is a term that I've heard often, more of a crew resource management type situation.
Yeah. Basically, that's the most important thing of it. Yeah.
That's why I have you here, Mark.
I try.
Okay, great. So you're in the Q400. Did you have any experience flying any of the earlier model Dash 8s before this?
No, the airline which I currently work for, they only have the Q400.
Okay. All right. So there's a clue for everybody if you want to dig into which airline this guy's flying for. But we won't get into that on the show. Okay. So actually, this isn't on my list of questions, but I'm just curious. Melvin last week said that when they were flying turboprops back in the day, they were, of course, flying the ATR-72, and they were always kind of jealous of the Dash 8 pilots, especially the Q400 pilots, because you guys have an APU, and you did mention that to me earlier that the Dash 8 is heavier, quite a heavy for a turboprop. So it sounds like to me, and I have a friend who has flown the Q400 as well for Porter in Toronto, and he said that it really is like flying a jet in terms of how it feels and how much quieter it is than normal turboprops. Or other turboprops, I should say. So would you agree with that?
Well, I've no flying experience on other aircraft, but what I can tell you, it really is a beast. And Bombardier, they sell the aircraft as the speed of a jet and the costs of a turboprop, basically.
Right.
So it's a really powerful aircraft, very nice to fly.
Cool. So let's get into.
It amazes me how fast they get off the ground too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get into the infinite flight portion. I really wanted to have you on because you have been such a huge contributor to the release of the Dash 8 in infinite flight. And by the way, thank you. I'm sure everybody is very thankful of all your help, especially Matt and Philippe and those guys.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the release of the Dash 8 on infinite flight, how did you get involved in helping these guys?
Well, my friend Arnoud, he told me that the Infinite flight team wanted to develop the Dash 8, and therefore they needed help. They needed pictures, feedback, background information, numbers, etc., which I provided. So Arnott brought me in contact with especially Matt and Jarno. And since that moment, I literally spammed the both of them and sent them loads of emails containing real-life facts, pictures, figures, everything in order to build and improve the Dash 8 in Infinite Flight. And it's really cool if you see your feedback to be implemented in the beta model of the Dash 8.
Oh yeah, for
and
sure.
To see the aircraft behavior improving. And I must say, the Infinite Flight team did a fantastic job.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that was part of one of my other questions is how, and we had people asking on Facebook too, how closely do you feel that the current release of the Dash 8 models something in real life, I guess, as in terms of being in a flight simulator?
Yeah, it's really difficult to build a new aircraft from scratch and to reproduce the feeling of an aircraft into a digital model. That's really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So the first beta model was way too fast. It was almost like an F-16 sometimes, and it really improved since with the feedback and information I gave them. So I think it's really close to a real life.
Awesome. It's been kind of fun to, as I've been able to test it a little bit as well, is to see the changes that happen, and we offer our feedback, and then to know that you're kind of in the background with those guys and saying, okay, well, what these guys are saying is true, or no, it's actually behaving more like a jet would in this situation where it actually needs to behave like this. Very, very cool to see that kind of process unfold.
Yeah, we've definitely seen the progress from the jet speed, that, if you will, to the release. So it was quite entertaining, sometimes frustrating, just having to, because we've flown jets for so long on Infinite Flight. Now, I've been personally wanting a turboprop for the longest time, but when you have that mindset of flying a jet for so long, and then now you've got to transition to a turboprop, it's just making that mental transition on the different speeds. You can't be cruising at 34,000 feet at 400 knots in the Dash 8. So just little things.
Yeah, well, and that's actually what I want to touch on now is last week we talked kind of turboprops in general, and although this is part 2, we really are focusing on the Dash 8 since that's the new airplane in Infinite Flight. So, Ard Jan, let's get into some nerdy details, if you don't mind, and get into some real specifics.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, great. So just to help our listeners who are just, I think, chomping at the bit just to get a real feel of, okay, what exactly should I be doing here to model, real life behavior. So here we go. Into some specifics. For one, what are we? So we're on the ground. We don't have cold start in Infinite Flight, so we won't worry about that right now. But in terms of taxiing, we've heard 30 knots is max taxi speed for some airlines. We can't go over 35 knots in Infinite Flight on the ground on the advanced server. But what are we taxiing at in the turboprop, specifically in the Dash 8?
Actually, the same speeds, and I think that 30 knots mentioned, I think that's a legal requirement as well.
Okay.
So, with the Dash 8, you can taxi actually the same speeds as any other aircraft do. And the funny thing is, the Dash 8 is quite powerful and not extremely heavy. So you can, it's quite easy to make a high-speed turn in a Dash 8.
Okay, and Arnaud was telling us that in the A380, so you're in the Dash 8, he's in the opposite type of aircraft. But he's saying, when you're making turns, turn onto the runway or whatever, some kind of a tight turn, you're doing no more than 10 knots. So is that not the case with the Dash 8?
Yes, it's maybe 15. Yeah,
okay.
It depends on how tight the turn is.
Okay, so there we go. We're 15 knots to 30 knots on the ground, and then we're lining up for takeoff. Can you run us through some different takeoff scenarios in terms of flap speeds and flap settings?
Yeah, I can do that. I think Mainly due to the short takeoff landing characteristics and the powerful engines the Dash 8 has. We can almost everywhere depart with flap setting of 5. And on long runways, this will result in reduced takeoff power. And on shorter runway, and in combination with higher takeoff mass, you might be unable to use derated takeoff power. But most of the times, we are able to use reduced takeoff power and flap 5. And then the V1 and rotate speeds are then in the region of 108 to 130 knots.
Depending on weight?
Yeah, so if it's heavier, it's the speed will be higher.
Okay. And
that's interesting what you said, though, as far as the reduced power. Jason, correct me if I'm wrong. I remember Melvin said in the ATR a lot of times they went with just full throttle.
He did,
takeoff.
yeah, he did say that.
Yeah,
So
the Dash 8
is
is
power.
Yeah, the Dash 8 is so powerful engines. If you use the full power, that's that's a bit frightening.
So
Right.
when you
So
say
you-
frightening, is that what are the practical reasons for not using full power? Is it just too fast, or is it too loud? Or I know with jets they, our buddy Jared was saying, at least in the A320, they're not taking off at full power because it's just too noisy and unnecessary wear and tear on the engines, and for reasons like that. So what are some practical reasons that you're not taking off with full power?
Yeah, it's a noise, and it's really the wear and tear as well, just as a jet engine, basically.
Okay, so you're dealing with a lot
So
of
would
power.
you say would you say maybe around 90, 95%, or
Well,
less than that?
that's an interesting point. The normal takeoff power is 90%, so it's derated already, and on top of that, we can derate even more to about 80%.
Wow.
So it depends really on the situation, on the weight of the aircraft, how much you want to reduce the takeoff power.
This is great.
Winds
I have
and
to
all that
adjust.
stuff, yeah.
I have to adjust the way I've been flying this airplane.
Me too, because I was doing full power.
Me too.
I started off at around 92, 96%, and then when Melvin was saying in the ATR they do 100%, I was going 100%. And then, because even in the jets, I never do, of course, you're looking at the N1, and I always put my N1 no higher than around 92, 96% for takeoff in the jet. But yeah, it's good. I didn't know it went all the way down to 80%. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, Melvin's theory of just turning it up until you smell smoke and going is I'm going to have to be adjusted, I think, for the Dash 8. Okay, so now that we've taken off, we're retracting our flaps at some point, and then we're climbing up to cruising altitude. And so when we're in cruise, what are we looking at typically for? I guess from my understanding, it depends on how far you're going and the jet stream and all that kind of stuff in terms of speed and altitude. But why don't you give us some typical scenarios?
Well, the Dash 8 Q400 is certified to go up to 25,000 feet. And the airline plans the cruising level for us and files the flight plan accordingly. We as pilots, we can deviate from this. So if we have a valid reason to do so. So we can ask for a lower level, for example, to take the advantage of decreased headwind component on that lower level. So that saves us fuel and time in the air, basically. And actually, the higher up in the sky, the more fuel efficient we can fly. So that's what we mostly do. And the cruising speed actually depends on the situation. If we are ahead of the schedule and there's no need at all to fly faster than you have to, in that case, we can fly a specific cost index speed computed by the EFB, the electronic flight bag. And that takes into account the maintenance cost, engine hours, fuel price, and a lot of other variables. And it computes an optimal cruise speed to save fuel, basically.
Okay, so if you're not in a rush, that's what you're going to be following for the most part.
Yeah. And if we're running late and the cruise, we can fly just under VMO speed. So it's basically the flight deck crew who makes the decision on the speed to be flown in a cruise, unless, well, ATC tells us to fly a certain speed, which happens sometimes as well.
Okay.
Because I remember if I could, some of the pilots that used to come into the airport for Northwest Airlink flying the Saab 340s. Of course, whenever you would we would print up their weather package, flight route, and all that. Of course, it would all be in the ACARS as well. They would have an assigned alternate if they had to divert anywhere. And of course, the weather would be for that as well. But one thing I remember is, especially late at night, they would have their regular flight plan, but a lot of times they would get up, because I used to fly jump seat a lot, and they would request 10,000 direct. Do y'all ever get to have that option over in the UK?
Well, I don't really understand the question. Why do you want to have a lower level?
Well, what they would do if it was the last flight of the night, and they were going to the destination that was going to be an RON, and they would be staying there overnight, and of course they would be taking the bird out the next morning. They would want to get there a little bit quicker, since it was the last flight, going out into a domicile airport as opposed to a hub. And getting to the hotel faster, get more rest. But instead of doing the flight plan, they would request, once they got into center, 10,000 direct to stay above, to be able to get above, of course, 250 knots, but also just to get the direct heading there and get there quicker. I didn't know if that was something that y'all did. And it was only on the last flight of the night going to a domicile.
Yeah, I think we could do the same, but the company is not going to like that, I think, because the higher fuel flow.
That could be why Northwest isn't in business anymore, too.
Cool. Okay. So we've gotten through the cruising altitude and speeds, and Melvin talked a little bit about. Actually, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Let's go through some speed and flap settings for landing. Now, we did talk, mentioning Melvin, we did talk about this a little bit in general terms with turboprops, but what do we need to know as infinite flight pilots when we're coming in for an approach in the Dash 8?
Normally the flap setting is 15 for any landing, unless we fly to a short runway. At our company, we have to fly with flap 35 if the runway is shorter than 1,800 meters. And the VREF speed for flap 15 landing is about 105 knots and varying up to 130 knots if the aircraft is almost 30 tons. And the VREF speed for a flap 35 landing are varying from 100 to just over 120 knots.
Okay. Is there a scenario where, speaking of flaps 35, this is only for short field landing and takeoffs, or are there situations where you use them now on a semi-regular basis, or never?
Yeah, we use them on a regular basis. Actually, we have in Europe the Channel Islands between France and the UK, Guernsey and Jersey, with shorter runways of about 1,500 and respectively 1,700 meters long. So then we have to use them.
Oh, okay. So this isn't just like a sort of only sometimes thing. This is can be a pretty regular thing. Do you, in infinite flight, are there any airports that you fly to specifically so that you can do a short field landing or takeoff?
No, I've never done that in infinite flight. However, if we have a long runway, that doesn't stop us from making a flap 35 landing. If we think that's better to do, then we can do that.
Okay.
It can be wise to do that if the winds are really gusty. If you then land with flap 35, the dash is better to control and better to fly. So even on very long runways, we sometimes use flap 35.
Interesting. Mark, does that sound interesting to you? Because I think you've said to me before, when you're flying the 172, if there's some gusty conditions, you'd rather land with less flaps. and more
Yeah,
speed?
for me, I try to come in with a little bit more speed, and normally around 10 degrees flaps. A lot of times I'll land even without flaps. I'll just 15, 20 feet above the runway, I'll actually just kind of level out, burn a little bit of the airspeed, and then just settle down and use 10 degrees. I actually rarely use 25 or even 30 in some of the 172s. So it's a lot different. To me, it's easier for me to control the 172 at a higher speed than it is at a slower speed. But that's just something that I've always done.
Well, and Mark, you don't conform to the norms of society either.
Yeah, only to pass the test.
Right.
Only when I got my license.
Yeah.
So
guys, Joe was asking this one on Slack earlier. He was saying, what's the why is the turboprop flap deployment, so specifically, I guess, to the Dash 8, so much slower than on the jets? And I know that at one point I heard that you had specifically told them you need to slow down that flap deployment on the Dash 8 because it was too fast. So is that why is that? Is that something that's specific to the Dash 8 or Bombardier, or do you have a comment on that?
I haven't really seen the difference in infinite flight jet compared to the dash flaps deployment. However, in one of the first beta models, the flaps were deploying a little bit too fast. So if you were flying an approach, it was really difficult to stay on the glide path, if you know what I mean. The ballooning effect would be too high if you select flaps too quick.
Right. Got it.
So,
that makes a lot of sense.
But I think all the aircraft, the flaps deploy at quite a slow speed because the autopilot has to trim the aircraft in a normal, comfortable way to follow the glide path. And increasing the flap setting will change the pitch angle of any aircraft. So in the Dash 8, if you increase the flaps from 50 to 35, there's a little delay on it because of the large pitch change, basically.
Okay.
So about, maybe nice to know for infinite flight users, a guide for deploying the flaps and gear. At approximately 8 miles, we select flap 5, and 5 miles before the runway, below 200 knots, we select the gear down. If the gear is down with 3 greens, we slow further down to below 172 knots and select then flap 15. And for flap 35 landing, you have to select that setting well below 158 knots. And if you follow that guideline, it will be quite a smooth approach.
Okay, awesome.
So yeah.
I will.
Go ahead, Jake.
I was just going to say I'll be out there practicing for sure because as Mark knows, I'm rarely doing it correctly.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go out and just sit at the end of the runway and just watch the people now, because you know what's going to happen. They're going to come in on approach 250 knots, be 3 miles out, and then they're going to dump all 35 degrees of flaps. Then they're going to wonder why they have a 60 degrees nose down attitude.
Yes.
So
the autopilot is smart, but it's not that smart. Okay, guys, this is more of a kind of a comment than a question. I did some controlling the other night, and I know you're all shocked and amazed that I was out there on the control tower, but I noticed that
you inspired me to go to.
I saw that I opened Aspen, and you were over at Eagle County.
Yeah,
amazing.
I was at Eagle County and needed Xanax 15 minutes later. I mean, I was just like.
If you attract a crowd in that region and you don't have approach, you might as well call it a day. It's just a complete beatdown. But anyway, so Mark and I are out there, and thankfully, I'll give a public shout out to our buddy Jaden, who is just the rock star of approach controllers in Infinite Flight. And I haven't mentioned him before, which has been a huge miss on my part. One of our best by far. So Jaden, great job.
Yeah. Jaden and G-Bach, they're the approach beasts.
For sure. And we've got lots of great guys, but they are...
absolutely.
They're
kicking butt. They take approach and make it into an art. It's like when you're looking at the map, they actually try to portray an image of some sort when you see all the planes perfectly lined up.
Yeah.
It's unreal.
It's beautiful. So I'm out there and I noticed that people seem to be using, a larger aircraft, or they see a larger aircraft on the radar and they assume that it's okay to follow with the same separation as if they're following a jet. So I don't know, maybe if some people don't realize that it's actually a Dash 8 they're looking at in front of them or not. But when you're, in fact, it's a turboprop, it's the Dash 8. So guys, our landing speeds in the Dash 8 are a good 20 to 30 knots or sometimes more lower than in a jet. So what advice, this is for both of you, what advice can we offer to pilots to maintain good visual separation when they're not being vectored by ATC on the approach?
Well, in real life, the classification of the Dash 8 is medium, and that's the same classification as the A320 and 737. So they officially need a separation of 5 miles or 2 minutes. So 2 minutes might be a good reference.
Okay.
And if you want to know all the real numbers, you can Google for the wake turbulence separation minima on the internet, and that can be very handy.
Great. Now the thing, I guess what the trick is to not come in too slowly too soon when you're on your approach in the Dash 8, because the jet's not going to go below, what would you say, Mark, typically?
130, maybe.
Right. So
135.
if your landing speed, and especially on a steep approach, maybe let's say on the Dash 8 is going to be somewhere down, between 103 and whatever you said, Ard Jan, 125, that can be a huge difference if you're following somebody.
In real life, air traffic control sometimes ask us to fly at least 160 knots until 4 miles.
Okay.
And after that 4 miles, we can reduce to our final approach speed. That's for separation as well.
That is exactly the kind of advice I was looking for. So guys who are listening, if you're on an approach in the Dash 8, let's try and follow that, because right now we don't have a way for the tower controller to, if there's no approach controller, we don't have a way to say maintain 160 knots until 5 miles. We can only say maintain best forward speed, and someone hits acknowledge and says Roger, and yet they're still 105 knots. Not helpful. Hey everyone, I'm excited to announce a giveaway on FlightCast this week. We're running a contest where you can win a FlightCast t-shirt that's been autographed by the entire Flying Development Studio team. All you have to do to enter is rate and review the podcast on one of 3 popular podcast services. For more details and official contest rules, visit flightcast.audio/contest. Hurry though, the contest closes on March 29th at noon Eastern. Now back to the podcast. Okay, well guys, let's head to Facebook for some questions, unless Mark, you have something else to add before we do that.
The only thing I would say in regards to, even on, it's something that we teach in the advanced server, but also something that we would like for the playground controllers to acknowledge, is that when you issue from approach, when you issue a specific speed, that they need to understand, like if they say, do not exceed 160 knots, that the controller can only see your ground speed. They can't see your indicated airspeed. So that's something I think has been confusing for a lot of people since the ATC has been out. So when you issue a speed of 160, they're only able to see that it's in ground speed and not in the indicated airspeed. So
yeah, definitely a good tip to look out for.
Yeah, so whenever they're issuing that speed command to maintain that spatial separation, to do that, to keep that in mind. So when you tell somebody to slow down to 160 knots, depending on the winds and everything else, they could be indicated, could be, even lower than that. But I just think it's important to understand the difference between the ground speed and the indicated airspeed when working approach.
Great. Good one, Mark. Okay, let's go over to Facebook for some questions. First off, this is the important one. Arnold wants to know, why are the Dutch pilots always so sexy?
Yeah. Do I have to answer this question?
No, it's rhetorical, but I had to get it in there.
If you would like, to put somebody else on to answer that for you.
Yeah, you got anyone happens to be sitting there with you, you can put them on. No,
Leave it up to Air for that type of question. My question is, why do Dutch A380 first officers sometimes have to act so, 2 steps from stupid sometimes? I just don't get it.
There's another reason I have Mark on the show. So, okay, we have a question from Emil, and I just want to acknowledge it, but there really isn't an answer from you because he's asking, do you prefer jet or prop? So this airplane seems like a blast to fly, and you say you're living the dream, so you're obviously having a good time flying it. What do you see as being next for you? Is this somewhere where you want to stay for a while, or do you want to hope to bump up to flying jets for the same company, or what do you see?
I already have a nice offer for more than a year. I will fly the Embraer 175 and Embraer 195. So
within this year, you're hoping?
No, that will be 2017 somewhere.
Okay, awesome.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to have you back on when you're in training for the Embraer. That would be amazing.
Yeah, cool.
So, great. So we can't answer your question, Emil, but we'll ask that one next time. Okay, so
you could ask on Infinite Flight, which do you prefer?
Yes. Okay. Sure. Which do you prefer on Infinite Flight then, Ard Jan?
I really, really like the new Airbus A320 series. I think that's really developed very well.
Yes, agreed. And easy to fly.
Yeah, it's really nice, and I like the sound pack as well. Makes it just a bit more realistic, and I like the Embraer as well. Yeah, it's very good.
Before the A320 family of aircraft came out in Infinite Flight, the Embraer was it was my go-to. It's my favorite by far.
Yeah, the same for me actually.
They fixed it.
Yeah, once they fixed it.
Corrected the Embraer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a nice bird.
Yeah. Okay, cool. There seems to be some debate on Facebook over whether or not the Dash 8 has auto-land capabilities. So let's just once and for all put an end to this debate. To me, it seems like some simple Google searching can really benefit people. But I won't go on a tangent this time. Is there a difference between an automatic approach and an automatic land? And is the Dash 8 equipped with any of this?
The Dash 8 I fly with, we do not have an auto land function. We have to disconnect the autopilot at least 80 feet from the ground.
Only 80 feet?
Yeah, in Category 2 approaches and higher up in Category 1 approaches. And
you have to be able to see the ground or the airport lighting, I guess, at what point?
At the decision altitude, which varies from airport to airport.
It's dependent on the airport. Okay. What would be a typical decision altitude?
Maybe 300 feet, maybe lower 190 in Amsterdam. Okay.
And do you know of any Dash 8, any Q400s that are equipped with Cat 3 auto land capabilities?
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Okay. So you don't know of any?
No.
Okay.
It can very well be, but I never searched for it.
Okay, well, I did a little bit of searching, and it seems like there are some Dash 8s that are equipped with a heads-up display, which allows them to fly the autopilot, or I guess fly a almost, what am I trying to say here, Mark? I'm trying to...
Auto approach.
Yeah, an auto approach, I guess, for a longer period of time before they have to disconnect the autopilot. But from what I could find, there wasn't a Dash 8 that was equipped with Autoland.
No, I can't really imagine that there is, because the Dash 8 is not equipped with auto throttle.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a big reason right there.
And it's one of the few aircraft where you have to put power on before landing.
Oh, yes, talk about that, please, because I think someone, it might have been you actually, on the forum, you were saying something at one point during testing about adding power at touchdown or just before touchdown. So explain that.
The Dash 8 is a bit weird aircraft landing, I think. It's quite difficult. At 20 feet above the runway, we will start the flare, and we just add a few percent of power just to smoothen out the landing and to stop the vertical speed a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
And to make it a stable and normal landing, basically.
Okay, so the flare doesn't do that. You don't have wouldn't ground effect normally do that for you? Cushion your landing a little bit?
Yeah, not enough.
Okay.
With the Dash 8.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if that has something to do with the high wing aspect of it, or. Well.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I just know how to fly it.
Mark,
Well,
if you have anything
I think
sarcastic,
about that.
if you have anything sarcastic to add here, now's the time. Yeah.
Well, if I was flying the Dash 8, obviously you would have to add power just to, soften up the landing. Of course, that would be with any aircraft that I'm in. So, just saying,
Come on, man, don't be too hard
Which
on
is
yourself.
why, look, I got the name Skyhawk Heavy for a reason. Okay, I'm just saying.
Okay, fair enough. Cool. Okay, so that kind of puts an end to the auto land debate. If anyone wants to prove us wrong and say, look, here is a Dash 8 Q400 without auto throttle that does have auto land, then point us in the right direction and we will stand corrected. But so far, none of us can find that.
And honestly, I don't even on the Airbus 320 family, I don't even use the auto land. I mean, I'll use it for the approach.
Yep.
But just being a pilot, as a real pilot, I want to land the plane myself.
Well, isn't that the whole fun of it, Ard Jan? Would you agree with that? Isn't that the fun of flying? You're in the air for so long, and then that's the grand finale. Don't you want to land the airplane by yourself?
Yeah, definitely. If you can, always do it.
Yeah.
It's the best experience.
You want to feel it. Exactly. You want to have control of that plane when you land.
Now, on the other hand, if you're flying into an airport where there's zero visibility and you can't see the runway, and you're in a jet with auto land capabilities, it's probably smart to use it if you want to make a landing.
I would still, and I've done that a couple of times on Infinite Flight. Of course, I don't have that option in the 172 in real life.
No.
But, on Infinite Flight, there's been several times I've flown into Point of Petrie with zero visibility whatsoever, and luckily Jaden actually was on the approach and brought me right into the ILS. And you don't see the lighting until you actually cross the threshold, and then as soon as I see it, I disengage the autopilot and land the plane myself.
Yeah,
it's just me.
I
want to control it the whole way down.
I'm gonna have to fire up Infinite Flight and go flying after this, making me want to fly.
I know, me too.
Okay, so let's just finish off these questions here. We've got one more from Facebook. A few listeners wanted to know, Ard Jan, if you've had to deal with any emergencies or dangerous situations while flying the Dash. Do you have any stories for us?
No, I think I'm a bit boring tonight.
Okay, well, that's fine. That's actually a good thing, I would say. Okay, no emergencies. Maybe by the time not that we want you to have any in-flight emergencies, but maybe we'll ask you that in a year from now when we talk about your flight training for your certification for the Embraer and see if you've got any at that point.
Yeah, maybe, but I think the Dash 8 is a really reliable aircraft. So
yes,
yeah.
Well, and
it's almost not tech. So.
Obviously, again, we don't wish that on you at all. So only happy landings for you for the future.
Well, surely there's been a simulated emergency in the simulator.
Well, let's actually ask that then. What types of emergency landings do you have to work on in the simulator for the Dash 8?
I think it's the same for any aircraft available in the market. Engine flame out, engine fire. I think that's the most exciting stuff, actually. You have to land the aircraft single engine, so that's quite difficult to handle them.
Right. And is that, would you think it's, from what you know, do you think it's more difficult to land a turboprop on one engine than it would be a jet?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because of I think the asymmetry of the aircraft.
Okay.
The prop is really huge and powerful. So if one propeller blade just stops and it's not feathered, it's really hard to handle.
Right, because all of a sudden you've got a lot of drag from that side of the airplane.
Exactly. So you have to feather it as soon as possible and gain control of the aircraft.
Okay. Awesome. And I should note, too, that we did cover Caleb's question. He was asking, when do you flare on landing? So we did cover that. So, Caleb, you can, hope you're listening, you can practice flaring at 20 feet above the runway and adding a little bit of power. So, Ard Jan, anything before we go that you wanted to say?
No, I think Infinite Flight is a fantastic simulation software and a fantastic community. Keep up the good work, everyone, and enjoy it.
Awesome. Mark, anything from you before we go?
No, man, this has definitely been a great one as far as with the information for the new Dash 8. So I think a lot of questions have been answered on Facebook by Ard as far as the specifics on speeds, flap settings, and stuff like that. Because that's what I've been seeing a lot of types of posts on Facebook about the different flap settings and speed. So I think Ard covered that very well. Thank you, sir, for doing that.
Yeah, no worries. My pleasure.
Awesome. All right. Well, once again, Ard Jan, thank you so much for chatting with me tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much for having me.
Mark, thanks to you, man.
Oh, always a pleasure, man. I always enjoy it. Thanks for having me.
That was Dash 8 pilot Ard Jan, and he joined me from an island in the UK via Skype. Thanks also to Skyhawk Heavy for co-hosting today. Thanks as always for listening. If you haven't already, head over to the App Store or Google Play and download Infinite Flight. For more of the podcast, visit flightcast.audio and be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us a great review. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/flightcastaudio and on Twitter at flightcastaudio. If you have any ideas for the show, please leave them in the comments. Flightcast is brought to you as always by Linkhouse Media on the web at linkhousemedia.com. We can always use your financial support to keep us going, and now a new way to do that is to head over to flightcast.audio/shop and get your very own FlightCast hat or t-shirt and other accessories. You can also donate by visiting flightcast.audio and clicking the yellow PayPal button in the sidebar. To cover the fine print, FlightCast is not affiliated with Infinite Flight or Flying Development Studio. I'm Jason Rosewell.
Thanks for listening and happy landings.
And get your very own FlightCast hat, t-shirt, mug, and other accessories. Ah, that was crap. Let me do that again.
You almost made it the whole way through.
I know.
So I'm sitting here with fingers crossed. I was getting proud of it.
I know.
We start to what's the name for it? This piece again, or you want to skip it, or?
Yeah, no, do it again if you want to.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so
don't worry, I rarely know what I'm talking about, so I just fake it if you're not sure.
Okay.
So I'm out there and I might need to start that again. Strap the cockpit on and away you go. I should probably edit that out. Hey everyone, I'm Jason Rosewell. Mike, man, off to a great start already.
We got you messed up with the alphaphonics already.
I just woke up from a nap a little while ago. Sorry. Let's try this again.